Hey there, you're listening to the Girls Talking Life podcast, and I'm your host, Johanna. If you're like me, you love time with friends. I always leave feeling encouraged, inspired to try something different, or I've learned something new. So why not continue to grow even when we can't be with our girlfriends? We're not made to do life on our own. So in each episode of this show, I'll bring you a girl and her story to give you refreshing ideas to stir your soul. Let's walk this road together. Are you ready to talk life? Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you chose to spend some time here. There are so many other things you could be listening to, and I'm honored that you're listening in here. I want to let you know about the free downloadable conversation cards you can get by joining the Girls Talking Life newsletter to keep the conversation going. They are great for a girls' night in or a small group or a women's event, and right now I'm working on redesigning them to be even better. To grab a set of these conversation cards so you can get talking, go to girlstalkinglife.com to sign up. And when the new cards become available, I will send those to you too. Happy Women's History Month! While I'm not spotlighting historical women on this show, I am so excited and proud to be bringing you the stories of women who are taking action today. If you're listening the week this episode drops and are being affected by the pandemic, which I think we pretty much all are, I hope the next 45 minutes can give you some much-needed reprieve from the headlines of the day. Do you love Jesus but struggle to connect with church? Do you ever feel like you don't belong in church? Or like you can't connect with the people there? Or have you ever been hurt by church? If you're answering yes to any of these questions, you might be a Christian misfit. But you are not alone. I am talking with Joy Vetterlein today. Joy is a writer, a creative, a former pastor, and a misfit who's committed to helping other Christian misfits find healing and belonging in the church. As the daughter of a pastor, Joy grew up in church. She explains how it was a place of joy, interest, and comfort for her, but also a place of confusion and pain and tension. She describes feeling the disconnect of what she was experiencing of God and what she was experiencing in church. The purpose and passion of Joy's writing is not to be divisive at all, but rather to bring reconciliation and healing to the church and its people. Joy offers ways in which we can begin to heal first internally and then in the church. And she says, you don't have to fit in to belong, and no one can tell you you're not invited because they're not the ones handing out the invitations. Jesus is. Joy reminds us that God works through broken things and broken people. She goes on to share how this healing has looked in her own life, and she offers us hope too. She challenges us to be misfits, not from a place of pain, but from victory, where we fully embrace our uniqueness and walk confidently in it. Everything we talk about can be found in the show notes for today's episode on girlstalkinglife.com. Here is my conversation with Joy. Hey, Joy. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hi, Johanna. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks.
I am thrilled to talk with you because your topic is so intriguing, what you write about. But first, just introduce yourself before we get into the meat of it.
Yeah. So my name is Joy Vetterlein, and I live in Southern California, just a few miles from the beach, and I love it.
How nice.
Yeah. It's just like the ocean feeds my soul, and it is really expensive to live here, but you just do what you got to do sometimes. So,
is this where you're from? Kind
of. Yeah. I'm from around, like the West Coast. I actually grew up in Alaska, which is unique, but then I wanted to go somewhere warm for college. And so I came here and I've never left. And, actually got my husband to move out here when we were dating. So I've converted him to be a Californian, and yes, we've been married 10 years and we have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and that's about it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you write about being a Christian misfit.
I do.
I just want you to tell me a little bit about what that means.
Okay. So a Christian misfit is a phrase I've sort of made up myself, but I was looking for language to describe what I was sensing in myself and sensing in a lot of people around me. So what a Christian misfit is it's basically anyone who loves Jesus but struggles to connect with church. A Christian misfit is anyone who is eager to grow in their faith and do life in the way of Jesus, but who finds that for whatever reason, the people at church or the messages we receive through church or the methods of doing church create more of an obstacle to growing in our faith than a conduit to growing in our faith. And I have developed just this huge passion for helping to bridge that gap between Christians, especially Christians who like really want to grow and love God, but who are just not connecting with this church, and to help kind of reconcile these two back to each other.
I was talking to my husband last night about what you do and what you write about. And I told him about the misfit part, but I didn't tell him about the reconciliation part. And he was like, well, what kind of message is this going to do?
Yeah.
What kind of message is this going to bring to your listeners? And I was like, no. The goal is reconciliation, which is wonderful.
That's absolutely it, because otherwise it's just cynicism, right? It's just critiquing things. And there's a place for that. There's a place to say, hey, you know what, this isn't working. This is hurting people. We need to address it. But the goal is never to slam anybody, or, the goal is healing. The goal is reconciliation and becoming fully alive and ridding ourselves of these, false messages and half-truths that we've learned about God that we just need to unlearn to really embrace the abundant life that He offers.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Your background is actually in church ministry, right?
It is. So, yeah, I've been around church pretty much my whole life. So when I was 5, my dad became a pastor of a small church in a small town in Alaska. That's why I grew up in Alaska. So I've grown up always close to the church, and it's always been a place of great joy and interest and comfort for me, but it's also always been a place of confusion and pain and tension. So, as a child, being a daughter of a pastor, for me, that was actually mostly a really great thing, because, I got to run around the church when nobody else was there, and I knew all the secret places, and we would, drink the grape juice and crackers after everybody had left after communion. And so I loved being on like the inside of everything.
Yeah.
And I loved even just, I remember talking about worship with my dad as a kid, and it was something that I really was interested in. And I loved singing my guts out to God at church and looking at the little hymnal. And I liked listening to sermons and drawing little doodles and stuff. And so that was like a really big part of my life that I loved. But then there was this other side of it where my dad, being a pastor of a small church in a small town, there was all these politics. And so just coming home from church and my parents going, into their room and having really serious sounding conversations behind closed doors, or my mom coming home and crying. There's just a lot of decisions to make for church leaders. And when my dad would make a decision that people didn't like, it was really painful. So the confusing part came because there would be people who, one week they would be our friends and inviting us over and giving us gifts. And, in Alaska, they'd be like, hey, we fished a bunch of salmon. Here's our extra. Like, here's some king crab. That's what they do to pastors in Alaska.
Nice.
And then the next week they would be cold and they wouldn't invite us over anymore. And they wouldn't look at me. And it was like, I wasn't really allowed to go play with their kids anymore, even though they were my friends. And so there was always this like, when's the other shoe going to drop with these relationships we're building? It was really confusing for me as a kid. So even as a kid, I grew to have this tension of like loving the God part of church, but being really wary of the people part of church.
That is so confusing to not know who's going to be your friend that day, or even starting to guard yourself from relationships at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, to then become a teenager, and I was not one of the cool ones. I was like, I was gangly and I had glasses and acne, and I had weird, by then we had moved to the Seattle area. So I had all this weird, like Alaskan fashion, and I was living in like a suburb, and I was like, what's this Gap thing on everybody's shirts? Like, what? Why does everybody have a shirt with the word Gap? Or what is Abercrombie? I don't know what any of it means. But so then it was like the same kind of thing, because by then my faith was really becoming my own. I had gone through some trials that, I really was developing a relationship with Jesus that was very real to me. And it was outside of the church. It was really just like me and him, like him kind of finding me in these really difficult situations. But then I would go to church, and socially I was like an outcast because I wasn't cool. I was nerdy, I was geeky, and I was awkward. So it was so confusing to hear messages about how God loves us, how we're all included, and like encouraging each other to like, let's like really like bring everybody in. But I'm like, but you guys aren't even bringing me in. So again, there was this disconnect between what I was experiencing of God and what I was experiencing in church.
Was your dad a pastor at that time?
No. So when I was 14, he resigned, and it was a really painful thing. That was actually part of the process of my faith becoming my own, is that we moved and I like lost everything in my life. And it was just like, I had no friends for a season except for Jesus. Yeah. So I would just talk to him because I didn't have anybody else to talk to, which now is like just this sweet, sweet part of my life, in my memory. But at the time it was, really painful for a 14-year-old.
Yeah. And then how did you go from teenager to kind of where you are now with your mindset?
Yeah. So then as an adult, I still really loved the church part of church. So I ended up getting into church ministry right out of college. I worked in the worship department of a church, and I have a background in music. And so I really loved that. And I became like a worship service producer, basically. I was in charge of the stage design and making sure all the tech and everything happened. And I really loved my work, and I loved the team of people that I worked with. I loved trying to figure out like what God was up to in our community and try to help disciple people along that. I loved doing that with creative writing and creative videos and imagery. And I really loved the work. But again, I never connected with the people who made up the church. It was definitely, I was in a posture of serving them, but I was never one of them. And the older I got, and, further along into adulthood, that started being really, really noticeable, especially once I got married. And we didn't have children yet when I was working at that particular job. But, as we got married, it was like we wanted community, and man, we just didn't connect with anybody. And I didn't know what to do with that. Like, here I am serving all these people and I care about them, but we can't carry on a conversation. And there were starting to be things in just the way that we did church that I was starting to question. Like, why do we even have a job? Why do services need to be produced? And then, I'd go to a Bible study, and I would have these questions about things about God that we'd always been taught. And I loved the process of conversing about that. But I would get into a Bible study and I would ask kind of a dangerous question, if all truth belongs to God, then we don't have anything to fear by asking questions. It's only going to refine what we believe. If it's not true, we dismiss it. But if it brings us to greater truth, then by all means, why wouldn't we want to know that? But oh man, in so many of these groups, I was just shut down so fast because it was like, no, this is what we believe. And, it just wasn't a safe place. And so I just sort of, at that point, I think, resigned myself to this fact that I had a relationship with God, but that it was always never going to quite fit in the context of a church. And fast forward, I ended up becoming a pastor of worship and communications, and was up there and was doing that till about a year ago. And even as a pastor, Johanna, I would be standing on the stage, giving the morning announcements and welcoming everybody in and saying things like, we're so glad you're part of this community. We're so glad you're here. We would love to welcome you into our church family. And thinking to myself, but I don't even feel like I'm part of this church family. How can I invite people into it? And in that moment, I think that's the first time it really occurred to me that there was something wrong, and that there was probably something wrong both with the church and something that needed healing in me too. So that job ended about a year ago, and we had a merge, there was restructuring, there was suddenly 2 worship pastors, and the other guy got it, and that was really painful for me because I had been so tied to working with a particular church And as I sort of grieved that, and this image of like walking around all the pieces of my grief just in, shambles around me, just realizing that there was really something there, that there was this tension that I had never felt like I belonged in the church. But why not? Because I love God so much. Why haven't I ever felt like I belonged in the church? And as I started talking about this more, and as it started coming out in me as I was writing, I found that I wasn't the only one. That there was a lot of people who, for reasons like completely different than mine, were also arriving at the same spot of, man, I love God so much, but I'm just not connecting to my church, to the people in it. I don't feel safe there. The messages I'm hearing about God don't jive with how I'm experiencing God in my real life. And there's this inner tension and frustration. We just keep hitting these walls and these hurdles. And I just kind of realized that maybe I was someone who's in a unique position to start doing something about it.
I have had 2 friends in the last several weeks tell me, I want to quit church. So reading some of the work that you've done and just trying to reconcile it, it just makes so much sense. And I'm like, well, why do we feel this way? Mm-hmm. You talked about merging earlier, and our church merged with another church late last year. And there are a lot of feelings, and there were things I was grieving, and there were expectations of what was going to happen. And it feels different than that, and those kinds of things. And the new church doesn't feel like it reflects our old church the way I expected it to. And I feel like my grieving period even should be over by now, but I'm still feeling awkward and just not quite there yet. So I feel this way too.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm sorry. And I hear you. And I know that thought of like, I want to quit church. And it's, if you look at, the way that the church formed in Acts, it wasn't a thing that you could quit. It's like, how has church become something that we want to quit? I don't know, that just when we feel this amount of resistance and tension, that really is we are sort of faced with 2 options. It's like, okay, do I just sort of shut down part of myself because I can't continue hurting in the same way every week? So do I just need to shut down that part of myself and just keep going and like ignoring that it hurts, but also not fully coming alive in the context of a church? Or do I just have to like bail altogether? Which is what a lot of people are doing, which I get. Like, I don't work for a church anymore. Man, some weeks I'm like, I don't want to go. I'm just going to like be confronted with all of this stuff again. I don't have energy to deal with that today. What's the benefit of going when it's so hard and it doesn't feel like it's either healthy or helpful?
Yeah. And both of the women that I mentioned love Jesus. Like that is not the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is crazy that church has become a place that people who love Jesus don't feel comfortable. That's a red flag. Right. There's something there we need to pay attention to for the sake of passing on our faith to the next generation,
Definitely. Hey, I'm going to jump in here to let you know about the show sponsor for today. I want to tell you about Pure Haven. Pure Haven is the maker of fresh, safe, personal, and home care products. Their mission is to educate the consumer about pure and safe alternative products and empower people to live the healthiest lifestyle possible. Their products are 100% free of toxins, guaranteed. I've been using Pure Haven products for years now, and I love that I can put their products on myself and my kids without worrying about the ingredients. My very favorite product is the Geranium Lime Body Oil. I use this after my shower as my main moisturizer. It smells like a vacation. It feels like a spa experience, and it moisturizes my skin for the day. It is my absolute favorite. Go to purehaven.com/girlstalkinglife to view their whole line of products and to shop now. Use code 258708 to support the show during the month of March. Talk to me about, I feel like there's a wide spectrum of being, I call myself easily offended right now. That's how I feel. But there's a wide spectrum and someone could be deeply wounded. So talk to me about some of the different types of misfits.
Yeah, well, I mean, as many as there are people, but ones that I run into a lot are, I think a lot of people find that they don't feel like their personality style fits in within a church context. You know, our churches are very extroverted right now. They're very high energy, extroverted, growth oriented. I kind of joke that the personality of the church right now is an Enneagram 3
Ah,
because it's like all about like, let's grow. And here's our flashy marketing to bring you in. And when you come here, we're going to give you the 5 steps for you to be better. And I am not an Enneagram. I'm an Enneagram 4. So I'm very, very sensitive. I have low energy. I cannot handle more than one thing at night a week,
yeah.
which disqualifies me from a lot of discipleship and ministry opportunities presented in my church. I like to be quiet and I like to have one-on-one connections with people. I don't really enjoy the small group setting. I get a lot of anxiety in it. So, okay, sorry, I went deep on that one, but that's personality type. I also see a lot of people, especially, I mean, I'm from the West Coast, but so many people for whom the political climate of church is really becoming an issue as things are getting even more, binary, bipolar, almost just these like party lines getting so distinct.
Yes.
There's so little room for people to have opinions on both sides. And, the way the church has, like, in the eyes of the country, at least, has really aligned itself so closely to this one particular line of politics. For a lot of people, I know that's really distressing and really troubling. And it's really hard to feel safe sharing opinions. So there's this political thing that's very real in the church and really something that we have to grapple with a lot of grace, but intention. Okay, so politics and personality. I think there are people, another big area I see is that people who have a lot of questions about God and they have a lot of questions and doubts about the Bible and what they've been taught to believe. And they want to know answers. They really are eager to seek out the truth. But kind of like I experienced in my small groups, whenever they ask questions, they're made to feel like they're a bad person or that they're not smart or that they don't have enough faith because they don't believe or that they're behind everybody else in some way. And that's just a really crappy way to feel, as a person. So I've seen a lot of people with big questions kind of leave because they are genuine questions that are actually keeping them from being able even to worship fully. Like, God, I don't understand this about you. And because I don't understand that, I'm not able to solve this sort of anger I have towards you. And if you can't get over that, it's really hard to go to church and like raise your hands and pretend you're like super excited to be there. That's not where you're at. And it feels really inauthentic. And then if you go to a place where you're supposed to be able to learn more and you ask questions and people are condescending or patronizing or just giving you the same kind of pat Sunday school answers you've always heard, what do you do? So that's another big category. And on my website, I have, like, when people sign up for my email, I even have a list of like the 10 types of Christian misfits that I've identified, even though there's probably like 900 types of Christian misfits. But there's 10. So I'm trying to remember them all, but that's a lot of the big ones that I see.
So Joy, what do you say to church leaders? Do you have an opportunity to input for them at all?
Yeah, I mean, so many of my friends are still in vocational ministry, and that was just, that was my industry
Right.
for a long time. That's the work that I've done for so long. And because of that, I really see both sides. I think on one hand, it's easy to really slam how churches lead and what the kinds of decisions leaders make. But I also know from being one, the enormous pressure that they're under. And at the end of the day, they're just like trying to do the best they can to bring in an income for their family.
I feel like most church leaders really do have their people's best intentions at heart. Yeah. I don't think anyone wants to alienate people in their congregation.
No, and they're faced with, you can't be all things to all people. And at some point you have to just be yourself and lead how's natural to you. And a lot of people are going to show up to church with a lot of expectations and you're going to let them down. And so I just have a lot of empathy for church leaders because I know the burdens I carried as one. And yet also I do think that there is a calling, if you are aware of it, to be a voice for change. so much has changed for me not being financially dependent on church work as a job that I feel like I've been able to step back and think really critically. There's this kind of scary truth that we have built churches that are so big and have so much overhead that church leaders can't actually like really afford to make risky decisions. Like if you make a risky decision and if half your church leaves, like you're going to lose your whole church. So then you're going to lose all the ministry that you're doing because you've got a mortgage to pay. You've got missionaries that are counting on you to be able to keep doing their work around the world. You've got a staff full of pastors and their families who you love. And, they deserve to be fed and clothed and sheltered for the work that they're doing. But because of that tension between like, oh, is this system really working? Are we effectively reaching the community we're in? Is this model of church working? Leaders don't really have the luxury of asking that question. But I think that's kind of the level of question that we need to be asking. There is this book I've been reading. A friend recommended it to me. It's called Underground Church. It's by a man named Brian Sanders. And he and his church have developed a revolutionary way of doing church. And it's revolutionary in that it's really not revolutionary compared to Jesus. It's just revolutionary for our setting today. Most of us are really familiar with what we would call like a sermon-centric model of doing church, where there's a senior pastor who leads and he is a primary communicator. And the church service is really centered around this 35 to 45 minute session of teaching where they go through Bible, and it's a real didactic style of teaching. There's somebody up front and everybody sits and listens and takes notes. And if you look at kind of the structure of your church, everything is centered around that and pointing to that. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people out there who are now saying like, this may not be the most effective way of doing church anymore. For a while it was. I think Skye Jitani is someone who talks a lot about this, but at the beginning, this made a lot of sense because there was limited literacy and limited education. And so there was a need, like, okay, give a Bible to the smartest guy in town and have him teach the rest of us. But now in the world of podcasts, we don't need to go to church to learn about the Bible.
Yeah.
That's not a need anymore. And yet we continue to make that the most important part of our Sunday experience. So what this guy, Brian Sanders, has done with the Underground Church, he's based out of Tampa, is that they've decentralized their church, and their church is now a network of micro churches that are formed based on mission.
Wow.
So there is a micro church whose mission is working with kids in foster care or adopting kids out of foster care. I've heard of one that this, a micro church's mission is to combat the opioid crisis in their area. So without a Sunday service, without needing a senior pastor to teach all that, the primary strategy and funding of this church goes to resourcing this network of little missions in the area. Instead of having a teaching pastor and a worship leader, they have discipleship pastors who are really pouring into the leaders of these small churches. And I'm just so fascinated by it because I find it so refreshing that somebody was willing to just do something so risky.
Do something different. Yeah.
And it's just fascinating how they look at it.
And how close those people will be if they're on mission together.
It's a whole other thing. So you join a group based on what your calling is.
Yeah.
Not like, hey, you're a person who's free Wednesday nights at 7. Come in here. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Just the connection you have when there's a commonality of vision and mission and calling. And that's how you do community, is that you do community as you're on mission together.
I love the idea of microchurches. We actually moved here to be part of a church that was starting out, and it was a small church, Joy, and we became a family. Mm. We were so small and we got to know everyone so well, and we had this connection that was amazing. Mm. That has since ended, but that was a lot to grieve.
Yeah.
Because nothing compares to it.
Yeah. There's that close-knit community. Feels like family.
Absolutely. Yeah.
sometimes I'm tempted just to call some friends and be like, do you guys just want to come over today? And like, we'll just have church in our living room. Cause that's really, we go to church and we're so excited for the 15 minutes before the service time. We get to connect with everybody. And then as soon as it's over, we're like, okay, like who can we talk to and how much can we talk before we have to go pick up our kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't think that the way we're doing church is even conducive to people forming connections with each other. Circling back to this misfit thing, could it be that part of the reason that we have so many misfits is that churches are all done this one way that doesn't offer much for anybody but the leaders to do really, or to participate in? I don't know. There's so much there. I could talk about that for hours, but there's so much there in the model of how we do church that I think could help solve this epidemic of people feeling left out and isolated from their churches.
So short of remodeling church, which I'm not opposed to at all,
right?
how do people move from feeling this way to feeling like they belong?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's a long-term solution, but in the meantime, that's not going to happen this week, and Sunday's coming. And we're all of us who have this tension Saturday night are going to be faced with that dread in our stomachs of feeling like, oh, I know I should go, but I don't want to. What am I going to do? Like, am I going to do it? And so to anybody who's in that boat, I mean, the mantra that I've just developed for myself and try to share as often as I can is, first of all, you don't have to fit in to belong. Jesus extends the invitation to you to be part of his church.
Yeah.
And nobody else can take that away from you. Nobody who looks different, nobody who has different politics, nobody who has a different way of experiencing God and experiencing community. Nobody can tell you that you're not invited, because they're not the ones who hand out the invitations. Jesus is, and he says you're in, and that's the end of it. So you always belong with Jesus, and you always belong in church because of Jesus. You may not always feel like you fit in. And so then the next thing I would say is, for me, it's been really good to remember that God still loves working through broken vessels. He works well through broken things. And I would say the church is something that's really broken right now, but that doesn't mean he can't work in it. And I don't think giving up faith in whatever God wants the church to be, I don't think giving that up altogether is going to be beneficial to us. I think we're throwing out too much if we throw out church altogether. I will say there are probably some churches that need to be left. I think there are some dysfunctional churches and situations that if people are in, like, man, get out of there. Like, I think it's really true. There's some things that aren't healthy that it's okay to leave and to walk away from. But as I think through, what do you do once you maybe hear this label, like, oh, yeah, I'm a Christian misfit. Like, what do I do now? So the first thing I would tell people is, you're not weird and you're not alone. There's so many of us that actually identifying yourself as a Christian misfit actually puts you in a club of people that you belong to, like everybody else who feels like they don't belong. And so I find a lot of comfort in that.
I mentioned it to a friend this morning. I'm like, I'm getting ready to have this conversation. I'm really excited. And she said, well, aren't we all misfits? And I'm like, well, maybe we are.
That's the point too, is that I find that there can be a little bit of, once we feel that pain, we can get a little myopic. I don't know how to say that, but just like a little inward focus that if I'm feeling pain and I'm going to church, I'm looking for things to reinforce my expectation that I'm going to be hurt. And when I get too far down the line, then I stop being able to see other people uniquely. And I can forget that it's just as much on me to see other people as the uniquely gifted and wonderful creations they are, as I want other people to see that in me.
Yeah.
So that's one of the practical tips I tell people is just, if you, next time you're sitting in a room and you feel totally out of place and your misfit anxiety is running high, look around the room and start identifying one thing about each person that you can admire, or that you can compliment, or that you can appreciate. Like, instead of being like, man, like she's so beautiful, I feel intimidated, you can say, hey, you have really pretty eyes. And there's just something about the act of doing that that's really good for combating this feeling of being a misfit. I also think it's really valuable for us to just name this pain and to acknowledge that we have it. Like, it's okay that I'm lonely at church. Like, it's okay for me to say, I wish I had more friends. It's okay for me to say, I wish when I went there on Sunday, I had somebody to talk to while I got my coffee, and that I wish I had somebody to sit by and somebody to talk to afterwards. And I wish I was in a small group that felt as close as those people over there all look. I think we somehow have adopted this feeling that, like, if I'm doing faith right, I don't need anything but Jesus. It's just me and Jesus.
I'm okay.
Yeah. If I had enough faith, then I wouldn't feel sad about this fact that I'm lonely. Like, why isn't Jesus enough for me? That's on me. And then I'm feeling ashamed of that. But, you know, the 2 commandments God gave us were to love God and love one another. There is an expectation of one another's being in our lives, and that's a need built into us. And there's zero shame in needing other people. And once we can name that desire and express it and start to express it in healthy ways, that's when we can actually start making connections. I also think that, like, once we become aware of it, we do have a choice. If we're going to stay there and kind of own, just be like, well, I'm a misfit, I don't fit in, that's just who I am. Or we can decide to try to seek healing. We talked about that a little bit, but I know for me, realizing, you know, identifying myself as a misfit made me realize that this is something I carry with me, not just at church, but everywhere. That I have from all those days when I was a teenager and I had the acne and the glasses and gangly. Like, I'm still that person, and I carry a lot of that with me. And there's some real work that I need to do internally and spiritually to start recovering from that. And that's not an easy fix, but it is one that I can do something about. And there's also, I find, a lot of healing that needs to happen in my relationships with other people and with institutions. I mean, to be let go from a church is a really painful thing. So I've had to do so much work to, you know, try to separate, okay, this relationship hurt because this, and this relationship hurt because this, and this experience hurt because this, and just like systematically trying to label out, okay, I walk into church, because by the way, we have returned and we still go to that church.
Okay.
Which has been like this huge healing experience. But to do that, you know, I would walk in and I'd face this wall of hurt. And my spiritual director advised me, you know, you're going to need to start isolating those different things and dealing with them one at a time. And wouldn't you know, when I was able to realize that this wall of hurt I was feeling was actually several unique instances, then I was able to start processing each one individually and finding some freedom.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I feel like with our merger, I have kind of this mound of hurt or confusion, and it probably could be separated out and dealt with more easily. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm no therapist. I know a lot of good ones, but I, you know, I heard one say recently, you know, there's the like what this means for other people. There's what this means for me and how this interacts with my story and my past. And then there's this like what this means for this community and how we move forward. And yeah, there's a lot there, but there's a lot there anyways, you know. It's life. There's always so much healing to do, and the church is no different.
Any last thoughts before we move on?
I think just like the goal of this that I get really excited about, that where I'm, you know, working towards myself and that I would love to help other people get to is, you know, okay, so we realize, we name this feeling we have, we like name our pain and our desire. We realize we're not alone. We start doing the work of like seeking internal healing. You know, I think there's a lot of self-love that needs to go into this too. A lot of times when I feel like a misfit, there's a whole lot of self-loathing, self-talk going on in my mind.
Yeah.
And as I've started trying to shift that into like loving myself and owning, like, you know what? It's okay that my pants are the size they are. It's okay that I don't like going out at night and that I'm a homebody. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not disappointing God. by being a whole muddy, he made me that way. You know, there's just a lot of that to do. But really this goal, this vision is, as we progress through health and reconciliation with our own selves and our own place in the church, I just see this opportunity for us to be Christian misfits, not from a place of pain, but from a place of victory and appreciation and ownership, to be wholly confident in this self that God has created me to be, and to realize that I have a unique contribution. The way I stand out is a gift to the church. And so when I show up to church, I'm not looking for anybody to validate me. I have received my validation from the Lord already, and I am showing up with the confidence to give of myself, to love in my own unique way, to be present and to serve others in a way that, you know, only I can do it. Again, my Enneagram 4 is showing here, wanting to be special, but just to have this, I mean, I just imagine this church full of people who right now don't want to go to church and who want to quit church because we feel like we don't belong there. But to flip that around and become this community of people who have like fully come alive and who are like letting their freak flags fly and just being themselves in confidence. Like Jesus was a misfit. This is a kingdom of misfits. And to get to the place where I embrace my identity as a misfit and go and seek out other people who are misfits, that's Jesus stuff right there. That's like when gospel happens. That's when the kingdom of God is on the move, you know, and that
when you do that, then other people see it and they're like, oh, well, maybe I can too.
Yes. And there's so much room there. I'm convinced that there's so much more imagination that God has for the church than what we're seeing right now. Just so many different expressions of how to grow in your faith, and so many more expressions of how to do ministry. You know, we have such a narrow view of like what we do and like the 5 ways that it's okay to read the Bible and the 5 things you should do when you go to church. But I'm just convinced that God just he's not quite as interested in that as we think. And he just wants this hodgepodge party of his people doing what they do.
I love that image. Thank you, Joy.
You're welcome.
I want to hear about your favorite 5 now.
Oh, okay. My favorite 5.
Yeah. What are 5 things that you're doing or eating or listening to that are your favorites right now?
This was fun to think about because I didn't think I had any, but then I started thinking and I was like, oh, I really do. So there's a podcast that for me has felt like, as I've been processing all of this kind of thinking, I felt like there was a lot of commonality on the people there, and I kind of connected to a community. So it's called the Vox podcast.
Okay.
So the leader of it is on a little hiatus right now. He had made some bad choices, and it's interesting because even the way they're handling it is different. So I feel like controversial bringing it up, but because I love to not do things by the book, I'm bringing it up. And there's just a wealth there of so many good conversations about how should the church really interact with politics, and, what really, like, let's get into the nitty gritty of like women in church leadership. You know, I was a female pastor, and there's a lot of pushback on that. And so there's just some, they call themselves a home for the spiritually homeless. So I love listening to that podcast to just kind of expand my mind and try on new ideas. And, you know, if they don't make sense to truth, then I discard them, but at least then I'm that much more educated.
I love that.
Okay. So I have 2 spiritual, 2 like family, and then 1 that's just me. Okay. So that was one of my spiritual favorite things. The other one is somebody I found on Instagram. I think his handle is @Commoners Communion, and he writes prayers, and he writes really poetic prayers, and I actually bought his prayer book and have been using that. And I just love his approach to prayer. He has, they're just short prayers, but I've been using that in the morning, trying to like I've had to do a lot of like healing in my relationship to quiet times too. I'm going to be doing some work on that. But one thing I've found, I think I heard this tip from Emily P. Freeman actually, is that having a prayer you can read first thing in the morning instead of having to come up with your own with sleep brain has been really awesome. And I just love the way he writes. So his name's Stran Coleman, Strahan. I think he's from somewhere in the UK. Okay, my 2 momming tips, because that is like a big part of my life. I don't write about that, but it's a big part of my life. Man, I am all about the Trader Joe's prepared food section.
Oh, yes. That
Like,
is my favorite store.
if I need a win, I just whip out that mandarin orange chicken and like, I know my kids will eat a good dinner that night. So yeah, man, they save me so often. Also, another mom thing. So I've suddenly become aware of the sheer amount of plastic packaging waste we go through.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been looking for alternatives to that. So I found like some toilet paper company that's like recycled toilet paper and comes in paper and cardboard packaging. That's not one of my favorite 5. But then I found this laundry detergent called Drops, Dropps. And then instead of getting like a huge plastic thing of laundry detergent that you use and then you throw away, and then that lives forever in a landfill somewhere or in the middle of Garbage Island in the ocean, these are like little like water soluble drops of detergent that you just like pop into your washing machine, and then like no waste. And I'm trying to find more and more ways to do that, because
do they not come in a container?
They come in a cardboard box.
Okay.
The box is recyclable. And then, yeah. So they're like, do not handle with wet hands, because then they'll dissolve. But yeah. Okay. And then my last favorite thing, there is a lip gloss that I have been using for like 10 years that I love. I think they sell it at Sephora. The brand is Fresh, but it's their sugar lip treatment. And I have never put on a chapstick like it. It makes my lips feel so soft and smooth and actually moisturized for the day. So many chapsticks, when I put them on, I feel like it dries them out worse at the end.
Yeah. Is it tinted?
They have some with and without.
Okay. Does the cap twist off?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. My girlfriend got me this. I have one.
It's like a little metal canister.
Yeah.
I just love it. I like always have to have one with me. If
it has a really nice smell to it.
Yeah, it does. I will like pull out of my house, realize I forgot it, drive back into the garage, park, and run in and get it, and like be late to where I'm going. Just so that I don't have to be without it, because my lips just love it so much. So I like the color Petal. It's like a soft pink that adds a little bit of tint, but still just looks like a gloss mostly.
Yeah, that might be the one I have. And 10 years, that's a commitment.
I think it's been that long, but I just keep like going to Sephora and getting one. If I lose one, I mean, it's a big deal.
Devastating.
Yeah.
Well, Joy, thank you for sharing your favorite 5.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on and talking about this kind of elephant in the room, maybe, that no one else is talking about. And it's a delicate space to be in, but I think it's really important what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. It's been super fun to talk to you. And it's just been, the more I talk to people about this, the more I realize how many of us there are out there who feel this way. And I just, I just care so much. I just don't want anybody to have to feel this way. I don't want church to be an obstacle to people's faith. That's the opposite of what it's supposed to be. So yeah, Thank you for talking with me about it. It's been super great. You're doing such good work here.
Thank you, Joy. I hope you loved my conversation with Joy. I found her and her topic to be so intriguing and so right on when it comes to how I felt lately and how I know some of my friends are feeling. So I hope if you're feeling this way at all about church, you know that you're not alone. And I hope you're encouraged by Joy's story and her hope that she shares for all of us. Listening back to our talk, I heard myself say that in my situation, a lot of my expectations weren't met. And I know that's something that I need to work through myself. It's not the church's job to meet those expectations for me. If you'd like to connect with Joy, you can find her probably on a beach somewhere in Southern California, but also online at joyvetterlein.com or on Instagram at joyvetterlein. If you know someone who would enjoy this podcast, please share it with them this week. And friends, don't let the conversation stop when our show is over. Share your stories and start your own conversations with the girls in your life. I'll see you back here in 2 weeks. Thanks for tuning in.